A few miles south of Soledad, the Salinas River drops in close to the hillside bank and runs deep and green. One side of the river, the golden foothill slopes curve up to the strong and rocky Gavilan Mountains. But on the valley side, the water is lined with trees, willows fresh and green with every spring, carrying in their lower leaf junctures the debris of the winter's flooding. For a moment, the place was lifeless, and then 2 men emerged from the path and came into the opening by the green pool.
The ranch at which George and Lenny found work was in California. Rich and fertile, it was known as the Golden State, a place where fortunes were made, where the American dream came true. In the 20s, the farmers employed large numbers of field workers, but only for short periods. The fertile Salinas Valley was a checkerboard of small farms, growing vegetables on the valley floor and barley on the slopes.
My family's been farming in the Salinas Valley area since about the early 30s, I would say, Grandpa? Mid-30s?
1935.
In the past, there was a lot more labor that would come into our valley and be housed by the actual farmer, you know, in these labor camps where this farmer would actually hire a cook, and these people would pay the farmer a certain amount a month, and the farmer would put him up and provide him with his meals.
Homeless, rootless, and alone, these men would drift from job to job, never able to earn enough money to settle and raise families. John Steinbeck was born a few miles north of Soledad, in the town of Salinas, California, at the very heart of the valley. Although he came from a well-to-do family, his father was an accountant, as a young man, John spent some time working with the farm labourers. He copied their ways of speech in his novels, and sometimes drew on actual events.
He said that he actually witnessed one of his bosses get killed by a disturbed man, and I think that incident stayed in his mind.
Little Lenny actually existed. Steinbeck was working on a ranch near Soledad when he saw a large man accidentally kill a tame rabbit. More memorable, though, than particular incidents or particular language, is the hopelessness of the character's situation, summarised in the book's title. This was taken from a poem by the 18th century Scottish poet Robert Burns. In this, he writes of the field mouse that watches helplessly as his carefully built home is destroyed by the oncoming plough. In the same manner, George and Lenny's plans for a home are swept away.
He's loved in America and elsewhere because he writes about place, about America, and one way to understand what America is like, much about American history, is to read John Steinbeck.
He picked up his pen to catch the mood of the times, and the times ahead were turbulent. On October the 4th, 1929, the stock market on Wall Street crashed. Millions of dollars evaporated, life savings wiped out.
This is Rudy Valley again, stepping perhaps a bit out of character in singing a song from Americana. A song that has taken its audiences by storm, which may be explained by its theme, which is both poignant and different. Brother, can you spare a dime?
Factories closed, businesses went broke, and millions of people found themselves unemployed. America went into shock.
Once I built a railroad, made it run, made it race against time. Once I built a railroad, now it's done. Brother, can you spare a dime? Once I built a tower to the sun, brick and rivet and lime. Once I built a tower now it's done. Brother, can you spare a dime?
People flooded out of the paralysed cities into the countryside looking for work. 500,000 people alone went to California. Many ended up in the Salinas Valley, upsetting the already precarious livelihood of the seasonal farm labourers. Woody Guthrie, folk singer and writer, rode the railways along with these newly made migrants. He recorded their search for the American dream in his book Bound for Glory.
Indio to Edom, rich farmlands, Edom to Banning, with the trees popping up everywhere. Banning to Beaumont, with the fruit hanging all over the trees, and groceries all over the ground, and people all over everything. The color so bright, and smell so thick all around, that it seemed almost too good to be true. Sign says, fruit, see but don't pick it. Another one reads, fruit, beat it. Another one, trespassers prosecuted, keep out, get away from here. There's enough here on the ground to feed every hungry kid from Maine to Florida and from there to Seattle. Just what in the hell has gone wrong here anyhow?
The situation had become so bad across America that President Franklin D. Roosevelt was moved to intervene.
I pledge myself to a new deal for the American people.
The New Deal aimed to get the unemployed back to work by setting up public works projects. These were found in the city and the countryside. It certainly alleviated some of the suffering, and Roosevelt tried to bolster the American people with hope.
Fear is vanishing, and confidence is growing on every side.
But the best laid plans of mice and men come to nothing when pitted against the forces of nature. For years, a natural disaster had been brewing on the farmlands of the Southwest that was later to be called the Dust Bowl. Bad farming methods and bad weather were to blame. The fertile topsoil was quite simply blown away in huge dust storms. The land was left barren, useless, and worthless. People who had once owned land and a home of their own were left with nothing.
We had a lot of bad weather in Texas in those days, and they still do, actually. Cotton prices went down, and my dad maybe didn't do a very good job of managing, I don't know. And so we had to, went bankrupt, had to pay the bank and all of our creditors. So we auctioned all of our assets off, automobiles, stock, horses, cattle, pigs, chickens, everything.
The desperate Ramsey family, like many others, flocked west in search of a home and a livelihood. Yet more migrants for California to absorb.
Bought an old car, an old 1925 Ford. And there were 9 of us. And I don't know how we had our belongings on top of the vehicle and on the back of it and tied to the sides. And so we made it. It was 2,000 miles from where we lived in Texas to Salinas. Well, we lived in a tent city, you might say. And we had 2 of these little tent-covered, wooden-floored places where we lived. We had 2 of them because there were so many of us. And we lived there for 2 years.
I think that Steinbeck had become politically aware and much more sensitive to the situation in California, and he'd long had an empathy for marginalized people, for people who needed defending. And so I think that sense of, here are two people that I'm going to create who are maimed and crippled and needy and lonely, in the same way all these people pouring into California are needy and lonely and desperate. I think that, yes, that setting, that political climate very much affected the works.
He wasn't the only person to be affected by what he saw around him. Woody Guthrie caught the mood with his angry song, Do Re Mi.
Lots of folks back east, they say, is leaving home every day, beating the hot old dusty way to the California line. Across the desert sands they roll, getting out of that old dust bowl. They think they're going to a sugar bowl, but here's what they find. Now the police at the port of entry say, you're number 14,000 for today. Oh, if you ain't got the do-re-mi, folks, you ain't got the do-re-mi. Why, you better go back to beautiful Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Georgia, Tennessee. California is a garden of Eden, a paradise to live in or see. But believe it or not, you won't find it so hot if you ain't got the do-re-mi.
As Steinbeck knew, when life is that desperate, all you have to fall back on is your dreams.
Almost automatically, George shuffled the cards and laid out his solitaire hand. Tell about that place, George. Well, it's 10 acres, said George. Got a little windmill, got a little shack on it, and a chicken run. Got a kitchen, orchard, cherries, apples, peaches, cots, nuts, and rabbits, George. No place for rabbits now, but I could easily build a few hutches, and you could feed alfalfa to the rabbits. Damn right I could, said Lenny. You goddamn right I could.
For those fortunate enough to make it to the Salinas Valley, the burgeoning lettuce industry was one source of employment. Poor and disadvantaged people moving to a prosperous region almost inevitably became an underclass. The migrants were disparagingly known as Okies and found themselves taking some of the more menial jobs in the industry.
My mother worked with my father in the lettuce shed. They were young people in those days. My dad was about 32, my mother was about 29 or something like that. And she was a very hardy lady. My dad worked in a lettuce shed for 35 years.
Even so, the Okies rarely worked in the fields. The backbreaking work was left to Filipino labour. Even among the dispossessed, there was a pecking order.
I guess it was better than where they came from, but anytime you get out in the field and spend 8-10 hours out there, maybe 12, it's hard work.
Yeah.
No getting away from it.
At the turn of the century, it was Chinese labour. In the 30s, it was Okies and Filipinos. Today, Mexican migrants toil under the Californian sun in search of their dreams. Back in the 30s, hard times meant employers could pay pitifully low wages. As for health and safety, forget it. In Salinas, matters came to a head in the summer of 1936.
Got the lettuce strike at Salinas, California. Vegetable trucks guarded against strikers. Obstacles across the highway. And don't fall off or you'll make it run over.
And they would have guards on the fenders with shotguns and have barbed wire around the cabs, the truck, and to protect the driver. And there was some rock throwing take place, and there was some violence.
Yes, we also cried from tear gas. Now the prevailing weapon in labor trouble.
Eventually, the lettuce producers and police broke the back of the strike. Steinbeck's interest was focused, as ever, on the losers.
He was fascinated with the commitment of the people. Both the farmers and the organizers are trying to manipulate the workers. And I think he wanted to turn In Mice of Men to something, well, he called it a microcosm, something smaller, where he focuses on two workers.
The book was published in the same year as the strike, and it was an instant success, as was the stage play and the film, which followed shortly afterwards. Something in Steinbeck's character and his stories struck a chord and continues to resonate for American people today.
It's a very powerful novel about friendship, because all these men are going to go set up a farm, own a piece of land. They're all going to work in various capacities. Somebody's going to be the cook, somebody's going to work in the garden. Lenny's, of course, going to take care of the rabbits. In some ways, it's a symphony of loneliness, with every character wanting to belong to something.
Steinbeck is now one of the great figures of American literature. He's become a tourist commodity. His image has been turned almost into a national monument. But the concerns of his books are still very much alive.
It really plays into the American dream. I mean, throughout American history, what people have wanted and come here for and moved west for is land. And California in particular is, is the golden state. Was for everyone, still is for everyone. And in California now, people want land. That dream cuts across all levels of American society.